You don't lose when you make a mistake. You lose the moment you feel the need to explain yourself. And maybe that sounds strange now, because all your life you were taught exactly the opposite, that good people justify themselves, that correct people explain themselves, that those who don't defend themselves are hiding something. But think with me for a few seconds, without filter. Remember the last time someone accused you of something you knew wasn't true. Maybe at work, maybe at home, maybe in a seemingly banal conversation. You felt that tightness in your stomach, your throat catching, your mind firing arguments at high speed. In less than 2 seconds, you were already organizing sentences, proofs, examples, anything that could restore your image. And when he finally spoke, when he spilled everything he had been holding back, he felt no relief. He felt something worse, a strange sensation of having diminished himself. As if I had descended some invisible steps in that silent hierarchy that no one admits exists, but that everyone feels. This reaction does not come out of nowhere. It is almost automatic, like removing your hand from the fire. You don't choose to justify yourself, you are pulled into it. The body goes into survival mode. The brain understands the accusation as a social threat, and for the brain, a social threat is almost the same thing as a physical threat. It's the same circuit that, thousands of years ago, decided whether you stayed or were kicked out of the tribe. Being rejected meant dying. So today, when someone questions who you are, your biology goes into panic. She doesn't want you to be right. She wants you to be accepted. And that's why you talk too much. Not to clarify, but to save yourself. The problem is that the adult world doesn't work like the tribe. Nobody kicks you out if you stay silent. Nobody kills you because you didn't explain a delay, an error, a misinterpreted behavior. But your nervous system doesn't know that. He reacts as if every glance he crosses is a real threat. And every time you rush to justify yourself, you reinforce this circuit. You teach your body that the next charge will also be a matter of life and death. Visualize the scene coldly. Someone launches a dry criticism. You slightly lean your torso forward, start speaking quickly, try to align your thoughts while you're already speaking. The other stands still, almost motionless, listening. It sounds like a conversation, but it's actually a choreography of power. Anyone who talks too much is trying to control their own image. Whoever speaks little is observing. And the human brain reads this with brutal clarity. Whoever explains himself is asking for something. Whoever observes is deciding whether to concede. You may have never stopped to notice, but the hardest people to reach are not the smartest or the most articulate. These are the ones that don't enter the game. They are the ones who, when someone tries to push a narrative on them, don't rush to rip the label off. They simply don't wear the clothes that have been thrown at them. And this leaves the aggressor lost, like someone who has trained their entire life for a fight that the other refuses to fight. The ironic thing is that, in your mind, defending yourself seems like an act of strength. It looks like dignity. It looks like courage. But on the invisible plane of human interaction, it is the opposite. Defending yourself is assuming that the other person has enough authority to demand explanations about who you are. It's accepting, even if for a few seconds, that his version of you matters more than your own. And here comes the uncomfortable part. The more you explain yourself, the more you teach others to accuse you. Not because they are bad, but because every system learns from what works. If every time someone pressures you, you open your heart, show behind the scenes, expose weaknesses and provide context, this becomes a pattern. People, without even realizing it, start to provoke you to extract this energy, to feel like they still have access to you, to confirm that they can still move you. You begin to live surrounded by small, invisible tests. An ambiguous comment here, a veiled criticism there, a cross-question that didn't even need to exist. Each of them is a decoy, and you almost always bite. But there is a specific, almost imperceptible moment in which everything could be different. It happens between the accusation and your response. It's a tiny space, less than a second, where you feel the impulse rise up your throat. At this point, you believe you have no choice. That silence would be strange, rude, dangerous. And maybe that's exactly what has kept you trapped for so long, the idea that being silent is losing, when in fact it's the opposite. Because when you don't rush to defend yourself, you break a contract you never signed. You take away the position of judge from the other person. You stop acting in the invisible court and start observing the scene from the outside, as if you realized, for the first time, that that entire audience only existed inside your head. Perhaps you are still convinced that explaining is a noble gesture, almost a moral virtue. That remaining silent when someone accuses you is a sign of guilt or cowardice. This belief was not born out of nowhere. It was planted in you very early, in scenes that seem too small to have shaped who you are today, but that were repeated so many times that they became law inside your head. Imagine yourself as a child, standing in front of an adult who has already decided that you did something wrong. You had no power, you had no sophisticated argument, you had no status. All he had were words and a body begging to be absolved. You explained, not to clarify, but to be forgiven. When it worked, the tension in the air dropped, the adult's voice softened, the threat of punishment dissolved. Your nervous system registered it as a victory. Talking saved you. Years later, the scenario changed, but the internal script remained intact. Today, the adult on the other side could be your boss, your partner, a coworker, a stranger on a social network. But your body reacts as if it were still in front of that same old courtroom. One comment crossed into the meeting and you already feel your heart racing. One look of disapproval and your mind starts rehearsing sentences before you even realize it. You don't respond, you justify yourself. He starts aligning events, telling the whole story, offering details that no one asked for. And as you speak, something subtle happens. You move away from your own position as an adult and return, step by step, to the place of the child who needs to prove that he is not bad. There is one scene too common to ignore. You get a detail wrong at work. Nothing serious, something that could be fixed in minutes. But when this is pointed out, you don't just say, "Okay, I'll fix it." You explain why, the context, what led to that, who else was involved, how the situation could have been different. In the end, not only did you fix the mistake, you were emotionally exhausted. I left the conversation with the feeling that it needed to have been better, faster, more perfect. And the person who listened to you doesn't leave with the impression that you are responsible. You leave with the impression that you are always defending yourself from something invisible. At home, the script repeats itself in an even more painful way. A simple observation turns into an interrogation. You are distant. Instead of asking what the other person feels, you start a conversation about schedules, tiredness, pressure, lack of time. As he speaks, he doesn't realize that the conversation has stopped being about closeness and has become a desperate attempt not to be seen as someone who fails to show affection. You want to be understood, but what comes through is your dependence on that understanding. The most disturbing thing is that almost no one realizes this consciously. The people around you don't wake up in the morning planning to manipulate you. But every interaction is a learning system. When someone makes a harsh comment and you react by justifying it, the system registers. This generates movement. Next time, even without clear intention, that person tends to use the same tone, the same type of criticism, because something there produced a response. This is how you begin to live surrounded by small accusations, daily microtests that drain your energy and shape your behavior. And there is a strange, almost silent turning point that is rarely noticed. At some point in your adult life, you began to confuse explanation with identity. It no longer explains just what you do, but who you are. When someone questions a decision, you feel like they are not attacking an isolated act, but its essence. And that's why the reaction is so intense. It's not about the report, the delay, the misplaced sentence. It's about proving, again and again, that you deserve to exist without being questioned. Maybe you now recognize that heavy feeling you get after a conversation like that. It's not anger. It's not pure sadness. It's a mix of tiredness and shame, as if something in you has been exposed too much. You return to your desk, to your room, to your screen, feeling like you said too much, but unable to imagine what you could have done differently. Because, within your internal script, not talking doesn't seem like a safe option. And that's exactly where the mystery that changes everything lies. Most people believe that silence creates distance, creates conflict, and makes the situation worse. But there is a type of silence that does not remove, it displaces. It doesn't break the relationship, it breaks the invisible hierarchy that was formed without you noticing. But this idea is so counterintuitive that your mind rejects it. How can you not respond? How can you not explain? It seems like you would be handing your own image into someone else's hands. The truth is that you already delivered a long time ago. Each hasty justification was a small cession of territory. Each defensive speech was a confirmation that the other person's version of you mattered more than your own perception. And perhaps the most disturbing thing is to realize that if you stop now for a few seconds and look at the last few weeks of your life, you will find dozens of moments when you could have simply said less, breathed more, and allowed the weight of that accusation to fall to the ground for lack of anyone to support it. You begin to realize that the problem was never the accusation itself, but the invisible choreography that forms around it. Someone launches a sharp phrase and, before you even understand the content, your body already moves towards defense, as if it had been rehearsed for decades for that exact moment. The gaze adjusts, the breath shortens, the mind searches for words that are not to clarify anything, but to restore a lost sense of control. It's almost as if, for a few seconds, you stop inhabiting the present and are transported to a memory that you can't name, but that your nervous system recognizes with frightening precision. How many times have you walked away from a conversation thinking less about what was said and more about how small you felt for having said too much? At what point in your life did explaining become the only way to feel safe? This pattern is not just emotional, it is physical. Your brain releases substances that narrow the field of perception and put you in a state of alert, and in this state everything seems too urgent to be questioned. You don't evaluate whether the accusation makes sense, you rush to dismantle it, as if it were a fire about to consume your entire reputation. The funny thing is that when you look at people who don't go into this mode, they don't seem smarter or more prepared, they just don't seem to play the same game. They listen, they breathe, they let the sentence fall into the space between the two, and that interval changes everything. Have you ever noticed how some people don't seem to need to prove anything, even when they are clearly being tested? Perhaps the hardest thing to accept is that your need to explain yourself is a sign that you still see yourself as someone who can be removed from your place at any moment. As if your position in the world was fragile, provisional, dependent on continued approval. This is why the attack always seems bigger than it is. It's not the phrase that hurts, it's the symbolic threat of being displaced from who you believe you are. What if the real fear is not that of being wrong, but that of no longer being seen as valid? There is a specific type of silence that is neither passivity nor contempt, but something that borders on the unspeakable. It happens when you stop filling the space created by the accusation and start observing it as a phenomenon in itself. At that moment, you are not retracting, you are moving. The attention that was previously focused entirely on you begins to move to the scene as a whole. The other person understands this, even if they don't know how to explain it. The tone of voice changes, the posture falters, as if the person themselves had lost the script that guided the interaction. What do you think goes through someone's head when the expected answer doesn't come? This type of breakdown is not learned in communication books or in leadership training, because it requires something that is almost never taught: tolerating one's own exposure without reacting. Spending a few seconds facing criticism without justifying it is, for many people, more difficult than facing an open conflict. It's like walking without ground for a brief moment, trusting that the fall won't come. And perhaps you have already experienced this without realizing it, when you found yourself speechless not out of fear, but out of a strange feeling that there was nothing to add, as if the accusation had found no place to settle. How many times have you mistaken this state for weakness, when in fact it was a raw form of presence? What almost no one realizes is that this silence creates a subtle inversion. The person who accused starts to wonder if they exaggerated, if they were clear, if they were being fair. The center of gravity moves. You stop being the absolute focus of the scene and it starts to observe itself. This doesn't happen because you were smarter, but because you refused to play the role you were offered. And when a role is turned down, the entire theater becomes unstable. Have you ever imagined how many discussions only exist because someone accepts the script without question? Over time, You realize that the need to respond immediately is linked to a deep belief that everything needs to be resolved now, that leaving something open is dangerous. But look carefully how many accusations actually hold water when they are not fueled. Many dissolve on their own, like smoke in an open environment. And not by chance, the ones that hurt you the most are precisely the ones you try to erase with words. What would happen if, instead of rushing to clarify, you let the dust settle on its own? There is a strange freedom in not participating in what provokes you. It's not indifference, it's choice. You begin to realize that not every stimulus deserves a response, and that your identity is not a collective project in constant review. This doesn't mean closing yourself off from the world, but deciding when the door opens. It's an almost imperceptible movement, but it changes the texture of your presence in relationships. People feel when you are no longer there to be shaped by any phrase that comes across. And perhaps the most revealing moment in this process is when you catch yourself remaining silent not out of strategy, but out of a lack of real interest in proving something. When the accusation sounds distant, like it's being directed at an old character you no longer play. At this point, a question arises that we rarely ask ourselves: who am I when no one asks me for explanations? What if this is the closest version of who you really are? There's a strange, almost magical moment that happens when you stop fighting the accusation and instead take a side step into it. It's not retreating, it's not moving forward, it's moving energy to an unexpected point. Imagine the scene: someone attacks you with something that, inside, you know is unfair. Your natural impulse is to rebut, align facts, correct the story. But this time you don't do that. You listen until the end, keep your face relaxed, and respond with something that doesn't fit into any of the known defense categories. You agree, but not in the way they expect. Yeah, maybe I'm really hard to deal with sometimes. The phrase falls into the air like an object that no one knows where to fit. The other receives no resistance. It receives a distorted mirror, something that does not offer enough friction to sustain the attack. This gesture has an almost invisible strength. He doesn't validate the attempt to diminish you, but he doesn't fight it either. He neutralizes it due to lack of terrain. And the most curious thing is to observe the immediate effect of this. The person who accused loses the rhythm, like a musician who misses the beat and needs to find his way in the middle of the song. Often the person tries to correct their own attack, softens it, explains themselves, as if they were now occupying the place you used to occupy. It's a silent reversal, but deeply disturbing for those who were used to directing the scene. This type of response doesn't come out of nowhere. It demands a radical detachment from the image you spend your entire life trying to polish. It's as if you give up, for a few seconds, controlling the narrative about who you are. Not in the sense of abandoning oneself, but of realizing that identity does not need to be defended with every impact. You begin to understand that many accusations do not ask for correction, they just ask that you react to confirm the role they assigned you. There are curious reports of people who, when adopting this stance, see unexpected changes around them. A manager known for constant criticism begins to tone down, not because he has become nicer, but because he has lost the stimulus that kept him going. A family member who always sought conflict begins to choose other targets, as if unconsciously realizing that there is no more emotional return there. It's almost like removing oxygen from a flame. The fire is not fought, it simply no longer finds air. The most unlikely thing is that by doing this you don't become cold or distant. On the contrary, you become more present. By not spending energy building defenses, you start to observe more and feel the environment with greater clarity. Conversations stop being arenas and return to being spaces for exchange, even when fraught with tension. You notice subtleties that previously went unnoticed, such as the tremor in the accuser's voice, the insecurity behind aggressiveness, the fragility hidden in harsh sentences. There is a curious fact that is rarely discussed in studies on negotiation. It was noticed that people who do not rush to justify their positions tend to be seen as more trustworthy, even when they make mistakes. Not because they are more correct, but because they don't seem driven by fear. The human brain associates calm under pressure with competence, regardless of the facts. This explains why, often, someone who talks less and admits flaws naturally commands more respect than someone who spends minutes defending every detail. This logic also applies to unlikely situations. Imagine a serious delay, something that could really jeopardize a relationship or a project. The automatic reaction would be to arrive with a ready-made story, cascading justifications, an almost theatrical apology. But when someone simply says I was late and remains silent, it creates a different discomfort. The person on the other side waits for the rest of the sentence, waits for the defense, the explanation, the promise. When this doesn't happen, the focus shifts from the error to the internal state of the person who made the mistake. Serenity is more disconcerting than guilt. Little by little you realize that agreeing with the fact, without absorbing the negative identity that they try to paste on you, is a sophisticated form of freedom. You missed that. Yes, I made a mistake. And there is no battle, there is no stage, there is no audience. Just an isolated event that doesn't become a sentence about who you are. This simplicity is so rare that it seems offensive to those who expect drama. And perhaps the most immersive aspect of this practice is noticing how the world responds when you stop defending yourself. Interactions become shorter, more objective, almost more honest. People who previously tested you frequently start to approach you with more caution, as if they didn't know exactly which button to press. You do not become invisible, but unpredictable, and this unpredictability creates a new field around you. It is at this point that the narrative of your own life begins to change tone. You stop seeing yourself as someone who constantly needs to prove something and start seeing yourself as someone who chooses when and how to position themselves. There is no longer that urgency to correct every misunderstanding, because you understand that most of them only last as long as you feed them. And when you stop feeding, the silence that once seemed threatening starts to sound like space, like air, like a territory that is finally yours alone. At some point in this silent journey, you begin to notice that it is not just the way you respond that changes, but the symbolic place you occupy in conversations. Before, when someone questioned you, you immediately felt pushed into an invisible corner, as if you had to explain your presence in that space. Now, something different happens. The accusation still comes, sometimes with the same harshness as always, but it no longer finds you in the same position. It's as if, instead of your back against a wall, you're standing in the center of the room, observing the scene from a serene distance. And then comes the first big twist. You realize that many accusations are not really about you. They are attempts by the other to organize their own internal confusion. A delay on your part turns into an attack because the person was already frustrated with something else. A neutral comment from you becomes an offense because someone was already accumulating resentment. Before, you absorbed this as if it were your responsibility. Now, you begin to see the projection. And seeing changes everything, because you stop moving to protect an image that isn't even yours. This new positioning manifests itself in subtle but profound ways. When someone aggressively asks, "Why did you do that?" you no longer rush to respond as a defendant. You feel the question wash over you and realize there is a choice there. Sometimes you respond with another question, not to confront, but to shift the scene. What exactly bothered you about this? Other times you simply comment something about the mood of the conversation, as if you were observing an external phenomenon. Sounds like that got you really tense. Within seconds, the invisible structure inverts. The focus stops being your act and becomes the other person's reaction. The most stressful thing is that this is not always well received. There are people who feel deeply threatened when they can no longer put you in the dock. They insist, raise their tone, repeat the same accusation with different words, as if trying to force a door that will no longer open. It's at this point that you feel the old urge to explain come back with a vengeance, almost like a conditioned reflex. The heart races, the body heats up, and for a moment it feels like all the progress is going to come crashing down. But that's exactly where something decisive happens. You realize that you don't need to win that battle to get out in one piece. You don't need to convince, you don't need to disarm, you don't need to have the last word. Just don't give in to the role being offered. The simple act of not joining the game creates a type of tension that didn't exist before. The other person speaks, you listen. The other insists, you remain present, but not reactive. It's an internal twist that no one sees, but that completely changes the outcome of the scene. Over time, you begin to notice an even more disturbing pattern. People who have always seemed safe reveal an unexpected fragility when you stop defending yourself. They appear confused, sometimes even insecure, as if they had lost an essential mirror. You come to see that, for years, your constant defense also supported their identity. You were the fixed point against which they defined themselves. When you move, everything around you needs to rearrange itself. There are also moments of tension with oneself. After a difficult interaction in which you manage not to explain yourself, not justify yourself, not put yourself down, you may feel a strange mix of pride and emptiness. Proud for having maintained his own integrity, empty for not having received the validation that once came with advocacy. It's as if an ancient source of comfort has been turned off. And that internal silence can be scary, because it reveals how much you depended on that cycle to feel seen. At this stage, the temptation to return to the old pattern is enormous. All it takes is one bad day, a more direct criticism, a cross look from someone important, and the old narrative tries to regain control. You start to wonder if you weren't exaggerating, if it wouldn't be simpler to explain everything straight away and put an end to the discomfort. This is the point of greatest risk, the true test of the process, because no one puts more pressure on you than yourself. But if you go through this phase, something consolidates. You realize that your presence is no longer so easy to shape. People start talking to you differently, more carefully, more objectively. Some move away, not out of anger, but because they no longer know how to interact. Others approach, curious about this new stance that asks for nothing and offers no justifications. And in the midst of this silent transformation, an inevitable question arises that accompanies you to the edge of history if you no longer need to defend yourself to exist. Who do you become when no one puts you in the dock anymore? Maybe now, after all we've been through, you're feeling something hard to name. It's not exactly excitement, or fear, or relief. It's more like a door has been opened from the inside, revealing a space that has always been there, but that you've never truly entered. You begin to realize that your entire life was built on an invisible logic of defense, as if each day was a sequence of small trials where you needed to prove that you deserved to occupy your own place. And once you see this clearly, there is no going back. The old rush to explain yourself starts to sound strange, almost childish, like an inherited habit that no longer matches who you are becoming. Now comes the part that really matters: how to transform all of this into something alive, applicable, everyday, without becoming a caricature of silence or a person who is too distant. Because the objective is not to close yourself off, it is to choose. The first step is brutally simple and, therefore, uncomfortable. Over the next few days, every time you feel the urge to explain yourself, pause for 2 seconds. Just 2. Not to mount a better response, but to feel the momentum in the body. Observe where it is born, how it rises up the chest, how the throat tightens. That tiny gap is the turning point. That's where you stop being dragged and start driving. Then replace defense with finding. If you made a mistake, state the bare fact. I was wrong. If you were late, I was late. No adjectives, no context, no rescue narrative. You are not diminishing yourself. You are freeing yourself from the need to manage other people's perceptions. At first, this will seem like a leap in the dark. The mind will scream that you are being misunderstood, that you need to complete the sentence, that something was missing. And it will be. This void is the space where your sovereignty begins to exist. Another essential step is learning to hear an accusation as if it were just a sound, not a sentence. Most people listen to criticism as if it were a diagnosis of who they are. You will practice listening as if you were listening to a description of the weather, something that may be there, but does not define you. Instead of asking yourself, how do I defend myself against this? Try asking, is this mine? Often the honest answer will be no. And when it isn't, when there is truth, you accept the fact without wearing the label. An error is not identity. A delay is not character. A bad day is not who you are. There will be times when you will fail in this process. You'll find yourself explaining too much, feeling ashamed later, returning to the old pattern. Don't turn this into another reason to attack yourself. Use as a signal. Every time you automatically justify yourself, something in you still believes you need to ask permission to exist. And this is not erased with willpower, but with repeated presence. Over time, you will notice almost imperceptible changes. Shorter conversations. Less wear and tear after difficult interactions. A strange feeling of internal space, as if there were more air inside you. Some people will be surprised, maybe even move away. Others will approach, attracted by this calm that asks for nothing. None of these reactions define whether you are on the right path. The criterion is different. Do you feel more whole when you don't explain yourself? If the answer is yes, continue. Perhaps the most profound impact is realizing that you are not becoming tougher, but more honest. Honest with your limits, with your mistakes, with the fact that you can't control how you are seen. You stop wasting energy trying to manage impressions and start investing in presence. And presence changes everything, even when no one comments. If you've made it this far, I invite you to a simple but transformative experiment. For 7 days, play the game of not defending yourself. It doesn't matter if it's something small. Did you spill the coffee? Just say, I spilled the coffee. Arrived late? I was late. Does someone misunderstand you? Allow it to exist without rushing to fix it. Feel the discomfort, because it is the sign that you are leaving an old place. Notice how people react when you stop feeding them explanations. Mainly observe how you react to yourself. And if, at any point, you want to share what you're experiencing, even anonymously, write in the comments. Tell us what changed, what was difficult, what surprised you. Liking this video and subscribing to the channel is not just a gesture of support, it is a commitment to this new attitude that you are starting to build. You are not here to be judged, nor to explain yourself. You are here to exist fully.